Parsha. When we look over this Parsha of Pikudei and we reflect back on all the very dramatic events throughout the book of Shemot, the question, of course, is why are we repeating all of these very intricate details that have to do with the building of the Mishkan, ultimately to be used for the building of the Beit HaMikdash? Yes, it's tremendously important, as we'll see in a moment, but there is such a great attention to detail. So people will always ask and say, well, that's fine, but we don't have a Mishkan, we don't have a Beit HaMikdash, and maybe we should kind of gloss over that. But the truth is that the Beit HaMikdash plays a major part in Jewish history and in the Jewish idea of ultimately coming back to Israel, proclaiming Yerushalayim as our capital, building a central institution that will unite people from all over the world, the unique idea of Shalosh Regalim, of people coming to Yerushalayim at least 3 times a year. There are so many different factors that make the Beit HaMikdash so important, not to mention the fact that 1/3 of all the mitzvot in the Torah connect somehow to the Beit HaMikdash, which is an amazing statistic. So you're talking about over 200 mitzvot that have to do with the Beit HaMikdash, which means there are 200 mitzvot that we can't do today. And there are others that we can't do relating to kings, for example, lots of different scenarios that may not apply, but we're talking about the Beit HaMikdash being central in every way, geographically and spiritually, to the Jewish people. We're talking about it here. We'll see even more intricate details if you learn Tanakh in the book of Melachim, in the Sefer Yechezkel, where we're talking even more about the building of the Beit HaMikdash. And so I want to devote some time to understanding a little bit about this idea of the centrality of the Beit HaMikdash and what will it take to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash today. So the first question is, who will build the Beit HaMikdash? Will it be built by man or by God? Well, Rashi makes a statement, and Rashi is not the only one, but he makes this very esoteric and kind of far out idea that the Beit HaMikdash has already been constructed, the 3rd Beit HaMikdash, and it was built by Hashem. It's there floating in the heavenly realms, and it's waiting for the time when it will descend to earth. This is an idea that some of you may have heard before, and the idea again is that when the world is ready for it, when the setting is appropriate, this heavenly structure will just descend and become an actual reality within our material world. And you're just getting this picture like a spaceship landing of the Beit HaMikdash coming down and landing in Yerushalayim and Har HaBayit, etc. And that is a kind of visionary, idealized idea that some have. But the Rambam kind of shoots that down. And the Rambam states in Sefer HaMitzvot, no, definitely not. That's not what's going to happen. Building the Beit HaMikdash is an obligation that is incumbent upon the Jewish people as a communal entity, based upon the pasuk Va'asu li mikdash. They shall build for me a Beit HaMikdash. So we have to do the building. Anything else, I don't want to call it pie in the sky, but Beit HaMikdash in the sky, no. The Rambam rejects that. He says the Beit HaMikdash will be built by people, and he adds quite emphatically, Moshiach will be part of the building of Moshiach, of the Beit HaMikdash. And so we see its construction, according to the Rambam, will be one of the signs of Moshiach's advent. And therefore, it follows from this that Moshiach will come after we begin building the Beit HaMikdash. Although there are others who say Moshiach will come first, the Rambam and most of the authorities say, no, that's not how it will work. We will start the building, and then Moshiach will come along, and that will actually further the advent of Moshiach, who will kind of be the building supervisor when he comes onto the scene. But we will do the initial work in order to get the Beit HaMikdash started. Now, he writes as follows in his section on Melachim of Kings. And he says as follows: if a king should arise from Beit David, from the lineage of David, one who is versed in Torah and in the mitzvot, in accordance with both the Torah Shebiktav, the written Torah, and Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah, and he enjoins all of Israel to follow in its ways, to follow the Torah, and he fights the wars of God. Now, this is a difficult phrase. What Rambam says, it means he defends Israel, but we're talking about fighting wars clearly that against an enemy who is completely of a different worldview that goes against the will of Hashem. Well, if he does these things, he may presumed, and he's victorious, he may be presumed to be Moshiach. Remember, Bar Kokhba, along with Rabbi Akiva, fought against the Romans, and that's when the war was going well, and the Romans were in retreat. So that's why Rabbi Akiva thought he must be the Moshiach. But then, of course, the war was lost, and it was clear that Bar Kokhba, or Bar Koziba was his name, that he was not the Moshiach. But in this case, well, if it all goes well, and if this individual succeeds in his efforts and he defeats the enemies and builds the Beit HaMikdash in its proper place and gathers the dispersed of Israel, he is definitely Moshiach. That is his CV, his resume. And what's interesting that I think maybe occurs to all of us is this is something that we are doing now without a single individual. And that's why there's a great strong feeling that we are in the age of Moshiach, because we are doing the things that Moshiach needs to do. We are gathering the kibbutz galuyot, the people, Jews from all over the world. We have sovereignty over the land of Israel. And we are, of course, fighting these many wars against those who would destroy Am Yisrael, etc. So, although we can't identify an individual, there is certainly reason to say that we are in Yemot HaMashiach, the days of Moshiach. The Chazal say, interestingly enough, that in the era of Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananiah, the Romans actually granted the Jews permission to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. And there was work that was started on another Beit HaMikdash. The people rushed to begin the preparations for the building, but the project was thwarted by the intervention of the Samaritans, the Shomranim. They did not want to see it happen. They were our enemies, and they appealed to the Romans. And unfortunately, it did not get off the ground, literally. But what is significant about this is that they planned to build the Beit HaMikdash through their own efforts, and they did not wait for it to descend from the heavens. Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanani was one of the great sages, and he said, no, let's go out there and let's start building and let's get it done. And therefore, clearly, you see that it is our obligation to build it. The Radak, Rabbeinu Bachya, the Shalah, they all agree with the Rambam in this and say, yeah, that's what's going to happen. Now, some want to reconcile these two opinions as to whether it's going to be built by man or people, or whether it's going to descend from heaven, and to say, well, it depends whether we are worthy or not. In any case, it will come. We quote Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger, who says, it's my opinion that certainly the future Beit HaMikdash will be made by the hands of man. That which it says that the Beit HaMikdash will descend from the heavens, it means the spiritual edifice will imbue the earthly one with its sanctity, comparable to the body and the soul of a person. So we'll build the body, and the soul of the Beit HaMikdash will come down. Similar to what happened when the Mishkan was inaugurated, we had to wait until the fire came down. It was in the form of a lion, we say, this fire, and it lit the first fire for the Mizbeach, and that was how we were able to inaugurate, in a sense, the Mishkan. So we built it, but the fire came down from Hashem, and it's following that same pattern. Now, what is necessary for the Beit HaMikdash to be built? Well, according to some, a majority of Jews need to live in Israel in order for us to be able to build a Beit HaMikdash. Is that the case today? Well, that's a subject of some dispute. There are those who hold that we're very close. We're maybe 43, 45%, and we're obviously getting there because Jewish population is rising, Baruch Hashem, quite rapidly, while the Jewish population outside of Israel in almost all communities is shrinking. But I would make a very strong case that we already have more than 50%, because it really depends who you count as a Jew in Chutz La'aretz. And we know that there are a lot of communities that are counting people as Jews, but halachically they are not. An example of this, I would say, is in America. When I was growing up, we always said there were about 5.5 million Jews in America. And then later on, 30, 40 years later, there's about 5.5 million Jews in America. And the number is stagnant. And all of a sudden you come to today and people are quoting all kinds of figures of 7, 6, 7, 8 million Jews in America. Where does that come from? This is really the mathematically challenged, because when you add in the assimilation and the intermarriage rate, there is no way that that number is growing. If anything, it's shrinking. I'm not going to get into a debate with some of the commentaries on this and some of the opinions of various students of American society, et cetera. But I think that there's a case to be made that we already have a majority of Jews here. But it doesn't matter, because most of the poskim say that you don't need a majority, because when we built the second Beit HaMikdash, right, and we're coming up to Purim, and this is the whole point of the whole Purim story, that it is Esther and Achashverosh's son who renews the call to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash, and clearly we did not have a majority of Jews that came in the time of the second Beit HaMikdash with Ezra and Nehemiah, and yet we built it. So you see, you don't really need a majority. Well, do we need a king? Because as we said, the Rambam talks about a king, but as we mentioned, you don't need a king, you need sovereignty. Some political leaders may actually think they're a king, but we're not going to go there. But the idea is that you have control over the land and you have a sovereign nation. And therefore, we've accomplished that. Do we know exactly where to build the Beit HaMikdash? Yes, we do. And for some of these commentaries, I turn to some of the writings of Rav Chaim Richman, who's the director of what we call the Machon HaMikdash, the Temple Institute in Yerushalayim, Machon HaMikdash, and he is a very strong believer that really we have the ability already to at least begin the process of building the Beit HaMikdash. Now, he's asked, of course, what about the Parah Aduma? We all know this idea that we cannot really have a Beit HaMikdash while everyone is spiritually tamei, impure. We have to have a process to create that purity, especially among the Kohanim who are going to bring the karbanot. And for that, you need a Parah Aduma, a completely red heifer. And many people saying, well, people talk about, I discovered in Alabama, somebody's raising a cow that's all red, etc. So Rav Richman says that, number one, ideally you do need a Parah Aduma, but in a situation where nobody is tahor, the Gemara says that Tuma Hutra Barabim, that when everybody is impure, in a sense, nobody is. And it's permissible to go ahead under those circumstances. But he adds and says that that's something that's going to be solved. In fact, he says that his institute has several kosher red heifers that are valid candidates in order to really have the ceremony of the Parah Aduma, and they're being raised under scrupulous conditions and halachically controlled conditions, so that is something that could happen. So that's not a major problem. What about the items that would go into the Beit HaMikdash. We don't have them anymore. We don't have the Aron Kodesh. We don't have the menorah. So number one, he says, you can make new items. You don't have to have the originals. In fact, the menorah does not even have to be made out of gold. The halacha says you can make it out of other metals as well. In fact, if you go to Yerushalayim, you see that there is, on the steps leading to the Kotel, the huge silver menorah, probably much bigger than the original menorah. It could be made out of silver. He also says it could very well be that we know what happened to those items. Now, this sounds a little bit far-fetched, but quoting some of the sources that say that Shlomo HaMelech, he built the Beit HaMikdash, but he knew through Ruach HaKodesh that it's going to eventually be destroyed. So he oversaw the construction, and this sounds, it's like something we're experiencing today in a negative way. He oversaw the construction of a vast system of underground chambers and corridors that were beneath the Har HaBayit. And then he gave the command that in case of danger, you should use those underground areas in order to put these various items there so as to avoid being captured. King Yoshia of Israel, who lived about 40 years before the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, he commanded the Levi'im to hide the Aron together with the original menorah and several other items, and therefore they were not in the second Beit HaMikdash. They were hidden away already. So all the story about the Raiders of the Lost Ark, etc., it's not in Ethiopia, it's not in the Vatican. It was put somewhere underneath the Har HaBayit. And he says this location is actually recorded in our sources, and there are those who know exactly where this chamber is. As a matter of fact, the previous Rav of the Kotel, Rav Getz, who's a Zecher Tzadik Libracha, who's a great man, and Rav Goren initiated an archaeological expedition and came to an area which led to the chamber of where they think the Aron is, about 30 meters away from it. And they began to tunnel in that direction. But unfortunately, word reached the Muslim quarter, resulting in rioting. And the government of Israel put a stop to it, and they sealed the opening that they had made. It's a famous story, and it's very sad because the then Prime Minister of Israel, even though Rav Getz was attacked, he was put into the hospital, and the Prime Minister went on with a TV to apologize to the Arab community, to the Muslim community, for what was going on, because they were kind of secretly doing this digging. And it's just kind of typical of the situation we face on a political level. And as a matter of fact, when some very wealthy South American person who knew Rav Getz well came to see him in the hospital, said, "What can I do for you? Because this is really an insane situation where we have to apologize for looking for our artifacts, original artifacts." And Rav Getz said to him, "You can build me a shul as close as possible to the Kodesh Kadashim, the Holy of Holies. And you can go visit that shul today. It's very small, and it's a beautiful little shul." And that was Rav Getz's shul, but unfortunately he could not continue his efforts to go closer to there. Okay, we all bring up the idea of korbanot. What are we going to do about korbanot? How can we rebuild the Beit HaMikdash? Are we prepared to have korbanot? And this is kind of a bit of an open question. There are some people who want to say that in the future, the korbanot will be non-animal. They will be grain, they will be matzah, flour, cakes, vegetarian, essentially. And maybe so. A lot of people misquote Rav Kook and say that that's what he said. He did not say that. He was of the assumption, along with everybody else, that there will be animal korbanot, specifically the korban Pesach, which is a lamb. But Rav Kook did say that if we reach a certain level, that spiritually the whole world is on a higher level, even animals will be on a higher level. And then just as Adam could not kill any animals because he was actually friends with the animals. He talked to the animals. He gave them names, and they were on a much higher level. So Rav Kook says we could reach that situation too someday, and maybe at a higher spiritual level, the korbanot would indeed perhaps cease to be of an animal origin. What about building on Har HaBayit? Well, this is the kicker, as they say. This is the most difficult questions, because politically speaking, we can understand that all hell would break loose if we essentially displace the mosques that are there and we start to build the Beit HaMikdash. And this is indeed the essential roadblock. And when we think about rebuilding the Beit HaMikdash, so we have to factor in here that we may, in this particular situation, depend on a miracle. We normally say in Somchin al Nes, but we're going to have some very kind of cataclysmic events to happen, akin to the 6-Day War. And many people hold that Milchemet Sheshet Hayamim was the opportunity, it was the miracle, it was the chance to come back to Har HaBayit, reclaim it, cleanse it, and begin this process of rebuilding the Beit HaMikdash. It didn't happen. We all know about that, and whatever we can say, it's all in the past now. But if it happened once, it could happen again. And there is certainly a belief that Hashem, of course, can do anything, and we make the effort, but we have to make the effort. So therefore, many of the Rabbanim say, we have to do what's necessary. We have to increase our presence there. We have to assert our ownership. We have to let it be known that this is something which is important for us. And it's not so simple, because we know that many of the Rabbanim today are blocking and discouraging people to go to Har HaBayit, even to the places we know we're permitted to go to, that we're not off limits to Jews. So that's part of our struggle, to be able to set the groundwork. And then the hope is that there will be this lasting miracle akin to the 6-Day War, where the situation will be resolved. I'd say, though, that the bottom line is that first we need to work on our own society, and we need to have the society that deserves to have a Beit HaMikdash. As I wrote in my Parsha sheet, if you see it, first you build the house, then you put in the objects. This is what Bezalel taught to Moshe. And first we have to build our house of Israel, the Beit Yisrael, and we have to do what's necessary to bring a sense of unity and peace to every segment of Israeli society. And in a sense, the Beit HaMikdash, the house, is built from the ground up. It's where we are. We start on the ground, and then it can reach up to the heavens. So I'll just say a very quick word that I don't want to really devote much time to it. But yes, we're all familiar with the comments, the unfortunate comments of the Rishon LeZion, delegitimizing and degrading the holy Chayalim who are fighting the fight that is sustaining all of Am Yisrael, Medinat Yisrael, etc., and saying foolish things about leaving Israel and going elsewhere. If Chas v'Shalom, Charedim or Yeshiva boys are drafted into the army, I'm not sure where they would go. I'm not sure what country would treat them anywhere near as well as we do and let them do their studying and receiving money for it, and not necessarily having to work. So I think obviously the comments were ill-conceived. Somebody said that they're already they're contributing to a gemach of LL points to encourage anyone who wants to use them, and they feel they want to leave Israel, let them go. But of course, it's not happening. Nobody's leaving. But it does obviously illustrate the schism that we have in Israel. It's only one of the schisms and only one of the places where we really need to mend the breach in the wall of unity. The superiority of the second Beit HaMikdash, in which the Shekhinah did not reside, but it really came about through the people themselves, and they united through the Beit HaMikdash. Once of course, Sinat Chinam began to grow and Israel's unity around God and the Beit HaMikdash unraveled, so there was no longer any room for the Beit HaMikdash. And what exactly is Sinat Chinam? So the Lubavitcher Rebbe explains, he says succinctly, it is when one person does not make room for the other person. He believes that the other diminishes his existence and therefore he cannot tolerate him, says the Rebbe. And therefore, he says, we have to make room for everyone. And the Zohar adds that even if one shul would properly preserve the attribute of peace and everyone would get along with each other and everyone would respect each other and give the other due and their room, so to speak, their merit alone of that one shul would bring the Moshiach. So, we've all been involved in shuls and we've all been involved in institutions, and we know that it's not so easy. So we have to start somewhere. Yes, I see somebody in the chat said, yes, of course, it is a milchemet mitzvah. Everybody has to fight. The chatan and kala. I'm going to a wedding now, actually, in a few minutes to do a wedding, and they're not going to rush out to fight. But indeed, that is a situation where we know that it's a national emergency, that everyone has to participate, and that is an opportunity for unity. The Gemara in Yerushalmi says that each generation in which the Beit HaMikdash is not rebuilt is considered if they had witnessed the Beit HaMikdash destroyed in their own time. So we have to do what we can to try to build the house and try to unite the people, find a way to bridge the gaps. And they seem insoluble. They seem really almost impossible, but nothing is impossible. And we have to keep our eye on the ball. We have to look and see where our future lies. And that's why the Beit HaMikdash was such a crucial institution. It was trying to really bring everybody together. And it was something that people flocked to of every level of religiosity. And the best tools you can use for building on a spiritual level, it's love and it's tolerance, it's acceptance, and it's friendship. And that, of course, is something that we can do, that is within our power to do. That's what Hashem wants us to do. Hashem loves every person, every Jew, every human being even. And therefore, we have to always imitate Hashem, and we have to do our best to spread that kind of love and that kind of acceptance. And if we do, then we will be indeed one step closer to the rebuilding and the building of the Beit HaMikdash. B'meher b'yameinu. Amen. I would just add that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should guard our soldiers and grant them victory in this very, very difficult crisis and war. Hashem should watch over the Chatufim, the hostages that are still alive, and return them safely, and also bring a refuah shalema to all the many, many wounded, thousands of people who have been wounded in both in the war situation and also in piguim, another one of which there was today. Unfortunately, someone was killed, or someone died who was in the pigua. And so we should all concentrate, and that should be in our tefillot every single day. And that's one of the things when we really do assert full sovereignty and we really do clear the ground and make it ours completely without these enemies being able to attack us, we will be indeed one step closer to the building of the Beit HaMikdash. Everybody have a wonderful Shabbat, and let us hope that we will go from this place of difficulty and crisis to place of shalom, and of course, coming up, Orah v'simcha, light and gladness on Purim and every day. Shabbat shalom u'varach. Thank you for tuning in. Next week, same time, same place, 5 o'clock, we shall meet. We'll talk about Purim. We'll talk about Amalek. We'll talk about is Hamas Amalek and some other issues relating to Purim. And I hope you'll be there. Shabbat shalom.